How do you spell Hanukkah? It's an old debate among English-speaking Jews. I'm sure there were similar debates among German-speaking Jews and French-speaking Jews. Spanish-speaking Jews spell it very differently. So is it Hanukkah? Is it Chanukah? Do you need an H at the end? In Spanish, you actually spell it Januka because the J in Spanish is a ch, like, Jose or jalapeno or Hanukkah. You see, there's the challenge because Hanukkah starts with a ch, and we don't have a ch in English. So for some people, they'll do CH or KH or H with a dot under it. We have the same problem at Kol Hadash, by the way, because we're Kol Hadash with a ch. Many people just say Kol Hadash. But if you look closely at our logo, there's a little dot under the H, which is the academic notation for ch. So technically we're Kol Hadash, but nobody knows because we don't have that sound in English, and it's hard to understand it because we're not so literate in Hebrew in American Judaism. Now, there's even a book that a colleague of mine in California wrote called 100,000 Ways to Spell Hanukkah. And he came up with 100,000 ways to spell Hanukkah based on the phonetics of English or Latin language alphabets. I imagine if you wanted to do it in the Cyrillic alphabet, you can come up with another 50,000 ways to possibly spell it. Now, of course, the reason why Hanukkah is so hard to spell is because there is one correct way to spell it, but it's in Hebrew. This is a page describing the holiday. You'll see the Hebrew spelling for it right after the Jewish year. But notice in the English, they even have two different spellings of it on this page trying to explain what Hanukkah is. But the correct way to spell it is the original Hebrew. You have a ch sound. Remember, we read right to left in Hebrew. So we're going to start from the right side and go to the left. The first sound is a ch. Under that is an ah sound. Then you have the n, the n. You might recognize the nun from a dreidel. So chan. Then you've got an u vowel, which is that line with the dot in the middle. Then you've got a k sound, which looks like a C with a backward C with a dot in it. And then you've got another ah, but it's different from the first ah. It's a slightly different pronounced ah. And then finally you have the hey, the H sound at the end, just like you have a silent H at the end in English. Sometimes that happens in Hebrew too. So you have cha, nu, ka. And you might notice the hey is also on the dreidel too. So you've got two of the four letters on the dreidel in the word Hanukkah in Hebrew. So that's how you would spell it correctly, but that leads to complications in English, not just from the cha at the beginning. The k sound has a dot in it, which makes it a k instead of a ch, another version of a ch. But the dot sometimes in Hebrew means you have a double letter. You've made that letter twice. Notice in the English, Hanukkah with a ch has one k, but Hanukkah with one h has two k's. Because some people see that dot in the k sound and want it to have two k's in the English transliteration. They're writing it in different letters. Transliteration means you've changed the letters, literally, the letters of the wording. And this has created all kinds of problems for us in trying to write songs, because you've noticed in our services, we always put English letter versions of the song so people who don't read the Hebrew letters can sing along with us. One of our classic standard songs is called Eifo Ori, Where is My Light? But the middle line of that says, the third line of that song says, Where is my strength? Which in Hebrew is Eifo Kochi. It's the ch sound. So we have an option in our transliteration. We could write Kochee for Kochi, or we could write Kokhee to try to get people to say Kochi. But whichever way we write it, they say it wrong. So if we write Kochee, they say Kochi. Eifo Kochi, Kochi B. If we write with a KH, they say Koki. Eifo Koki, Koki B. No win. Hebrew is a hard language. And there's a number of factors that make Hebrew particularly hard for people who aren't familiar with the language or are trying to learn it, or even have grown up with some version of Hebrew but haven't learned how to read it, because even the alphabet, the Aleph Bet, is challenging. So I'll show you a few examples of what makes Hebrew a hard language to learn. So here we have the beginning of the Aleph Bet, or the alphabet. In fact, the word alphabet comes from not Hebrew, but Canaanite, which is an ancestor language of Hebrew. They're the ones that came up with the idea of having an alphabet with sounds that weren't syllables at once. The earliest writing was actually syllable writing. So you had one symbol for a ba and one symbol for a bo. What made the alphabet different was you had consonants separate from vowel sounds. So you have a b, a v, a k, a g. That's also why, by the way, the Greek alphabet, which borrowed from the Canaanites, has not A, B, C, D, as we're used to in English, but alpha, beta, gamma, delta, just like in Hebrew, aleph, bet, gimel, dalet. That's the sound order. So what do we notice here about this alphabet? Well, we have a slightly different order of sounds, although some of them come in a similar order. You have LMN. If you look at the bottom of the left and top of the right, LMN in English is the same as Lamed Mem Nun, the same sound sequence in Hebrew. What else do we notice here? We have some silent letters. You'll notice the very first letter in the Aleph Bet. The Aleph is silent. It's just the vowel sound. So if you had an Aleph plus an A, it becomes A. An Aleph plus a Bet, the B sound, the next one down is going to be Ba. But an Aleph is just the vowel sound by itself. But there's a second silent letter. If you look on the right column, the fourth one down, you've got the letter Ayin, which is silent, at least as Hebrew is pronounced today. We'll talk about the Ayin in just a little bit. You'll also notice that these letters often look similar. We'll see some examples of ones that reflect that. And there was definitely an attempt to make an economy of writing in Hebrew. Initially, Hebrew was not written with vowels. If you found an ancient inscription or carving on a pottery, it wasn't written with vowels because space was a premium, whether it was pottery or animal skins, which is what the earliest Torah scrolls were written on. And so they didn't even put it in the vowels. And you might think, how can you read without vowels? But if I gave you the word DG, picture the word, it's just DG. What word could it be in English? Well, it could be dog. It could be dig. It could be dug. It could be edge, EDGE, right? You've got the DG consonant. It could be a lot of things. But if I had a sentence that went like this, TH space, DG space, RNS, runs, TH, DG, RNS. Well, most likely it's the dog runs. You can figure it out by context. You don't need the vowels to understand the meaning of the sentence or the individual words anymore now that they're in context. So Hebrew, very early on, evolved the concept of not writing the vowels and simply understanding the words by context. Now, in a later generation, several hundred years after the Torah was completed, later people decided they wanted to create a vowel system. And so the Masoretes was the name of the particular group that did this. They came up with a series of dots and dashes that provide the vowel sounds you need for accurate pronunciation. After a while, there were too many words that looked similar, and you needed to know which one was the correct one being used. So you'll see here the X is just a stand-in for any one of the letters. If you look on all the way on the left, if you had a B sound with an A vowel under it, that would be a ba. If you had a B sound with the little dot vowel, that would be a B, and so on all the way through the Aleph Bet. So you have to learn, if you want to learn Hebrew, all these different written symbols. If you want to learn cursive, which is that more curly column you'll see, that's a whole other set of letters that you have to learn. And then if you want to be able to read accurately, you have to learn a whole set of vowels that are above and below and to the side of the word. So it's a whole different alphabet, and it's a whole different system of writing. You'll also notice a number of the letters have sounds that don't show up in one letter in English, at least, and in most Romance languages. So the B sound, the G sound, the D sound, we have all those, right? But the eighth letter down on the left, you'll see is chet. The best example they can give is ch as in Bach. So they have to use a German word to to reflect the sound of the letter. But that's the word in Hanukkah. You might have noticed that same letter is the beginning of Hanukkah that we saw. You also have a second letter that's also a ch sound. That K sound in the middle of Hanukkah, that's letter number 20. The number next to it is 20. It's actually not the 20th letter. It's the number value of the letter. We're not going to get into that today. It's called a kaf, is the name of the letter. It has a K sound with a dot, but if you take out the dot, it gets softer. It becomes another sound, sort of like the chet sound. Notice also that the dot changes the sound of the letter. The kaf with a dot is different from the chaf without the dot. Or further up, the second letter, the bet with a B has a button in it, but the vet is softer with a V. And you may remember in Spanish, the B and the V sometimes interchange. Another example on the right side is the letter pay or fe, P or F. Again, with a dot, without a dot, makes a difference. You notice on the right, the letter right below pay and fe or P and F is the tzadi. Well, that's one letter for the ts sound that we have to put into two letters in English. And the same for the sh sound of the shin, which you'll also know from the dreidel. The shin is one letter, but in English, we have to put it into two letters to say sh. The other challenge in Hebrew that isn't even reflected on this chart, because this is designed for English learners, is what are called guttural letters, letters that you kind of swallow while you're saying them. So technically, that letter chet, that's the beginning of Hanukkah on the left, again, number 8, you'll see chet. Chet is really supposed to be pronounced chet, sort of like swallowing. So it's Hanukkah, challah. You sort of swallow it. It's a more guttural sound. And the same is true for the ayin. The ayin on the right side is also silent, just like the aleph, but the aleph is truly silent, and the ayin is sort of like an ayin. It's sort of you sort of swallow it. Like the word shavua, which means week, is actually shavua. You sort of swallow it at the end if you're pronouncing it with the full guttural pronunciation. Again, sounds that we're not used to. And you might have also noticed that a few of the letters have an unusual form that's longer than the normal form. And that's what's called a final letter, because at the end of a word, if you're writing things very closely together, you need a different kind of the letter to let people know when the word ended. And some of the most common letters that show up at the end of words have a longer final form. So chaf, that sound, or the k sound, becomes with a long tail at the end of the word Baruch, for example. If you look at the Hebrew for Baruch, you'll always find that long final chaf form. Or if you look in the upper right column on the right side, you've got mem, m, that has a regular form on the left and a final form that's a closed square. Or nun looks like the letter on the dreidel, or a final nun has a long tail that goes down. And same for pei, fe, that becomes a longer form, or tzadi becomes a longer form at the end of the letters. Now, you might have also noticed, if you've been glancing through this chart, that there's a number of letters that look a lot like each other. So here are just some of them. On the right side, going right to left, we have a Z sound. Then we have a V sound. Then we have a Y sound. Then we have an O sound with the dot on top and an U sound with a dot in the middle. But you can see how those look very, very similar. And you can imagine a scribe who is copying a Torah scroll might slip, or the ink drip, and then you've changed the meaning of the word because you've changed the pronunciation of the word. It's a very different letter. And for students learning to read, telling the difference between these letters can be very tricky. Here's another set. On the right side, we have that K sound we saw in the word Hanukkah. But then you have the sound without the dot. Then you have the B sound with the button in the middle, and the V sound without the button in the middle. What? Don't those look almost the same? There's a little tail on the two on the left, but it's very hard to tell them apart. Here are a couple other examples. You've got the N and the G sound. You'll recognize these again from a dreidel, the nun and the gimel. But you notice there's very little difference between the two. There's just that little tail, almost looks like a woman's high heel or a person's high heel, or a boot high heel, if you put it that way, on the left. And then you have four letters at the bottom that are sort of square. You've got on the far right side a mem, an M sound that'd be in the middle of a word. You've got a T sound with the top falling in. You've got an S sound that's kind of rounded at the bottom, and then you've got the final M, which is fully square on the end. Can you tell the difference? Here's more. You've got the TS sound, which is the Sadi on the right, and the Ayin, which is silent, on the left. And then this is the almost hardest one of all on the bottom, the D sound on the right and the R sound on the left. Can you find the difference? It's almost like one of those puzzles, you know? Can you find three differences between these pictures? Well, sometimes in Hebrew, you're trying to tell the difference between letters that look very, very similar to each other. And of course, English has these two, you know, a capital I versus a lowercase l can look very similar depending on the font. But, you know, this is one of the challenges in getting into Hebrew, and also understanding that the text can change by a miswriting or a misreading of just one letter. And wait, there's more. Because like every language, there are cognates from one language to another. Now, modern Hebrew has some words that come directly from English into Hebrew, or from modern language into Hebrew. So email in Hebrew is email. Okay. You know, some of these are easy. Some of them get translated a bit. So the verb lepaster means to poster, to put up posters. From the word poster, they just made it into a Hebrew verb, lepaster. Okay, that happens occasionally. But there are words that are native to Hebrew that sound like English words but have nothing to do with them. That in Hebrew, the word me is asking who. And ma is asking what. But he in Hebrew means she in English. And who in Hebrew means he in English. So good luck asking questions or knowing who's talking in a sentence. Now, there's even more complications to add. I just have two more. One is there's different dialects. You know, we say in modern Hebrew Shabbat, but in Yiddish pronunciation or Eastern European Jewish Hebrew, it was Shabbos. It wasn't Sukkot, it was Sukkos. It wasn't Simchat Torah, it was Simchas Torah. If you grew up in an Ashkenazi style Hebrew, you would start the Kaddish, the traditional Kaddish, with Yiskadal v'Yiskadash. But Hebrew style is Yitkadal v'Yitkadash. And some of you actually may have grown up one way and then been part of congregations that said it differently, because we shifted our Hebrew pronunciation in America, even as the generation that was immigrating from Eastern Europe was dying out, and the new generation post-founding of Israel was changing how things were running. And I've only talked about the alphabet and pronunciation. I haven't even gotten into grammar. Hebrew has no present tense for to be. You can say I speak, but if you want to say I am hungry, you say I hungry. I thirsty. I hot. I cold. I will be cold. I was cold, but no verb for to be. The word order is different. You know, you have adjectives after nouns instead of before them. Yeled chacham, a wise child, but it's child wise, or child the wise one. And Hebrew is full of gender challenges. And not just gender challenges like in English or Spanish, where you have to know the gender of a chair or the gender of a table, you know, to speak correctly. There are nouns that have genders for sure, but people have genders too. And when you have a group of people, the gender follows if there's a man involved. If there's one man and 50 women, the gender of the group is male. There's a marvelous feminist Jewish poet named Yonah Wallach who wrote a wonderful poem, a little risque, I warn you, called simply Hebrew, that explores the challenges of gender and Hebrew. So here is Yonah Wallach's poem. Hebrew. About pronouns and sex, English leaves its options open. In practice, each I has all the options. You is he or she. I is sexless. There's no difference, and all things are it, not man or woman. No need to think before relating to sex. Hebrew is a sex maniac. Hebrew discriminates for and against, is forgiving, gives privileges with a big gripe from the exile, in plural, Men have the right of way. It's a thin line. It's a big secret. In the singular, chances are equal. Who says it's a lost cause? Hebrew is a sex maniac, wants to know who's talking. Almost a mirror, almost a picture forbidden by the Torah, at least. Looking at sex, Hebrew peeks through the keyhole as I did at you and your mother when you washed in the shed. Your mother had a big ass, but I never stopped thinking. The days passed like showers. You remained a thin girl, soaping yourself. Afterwards, you women plugged all the holes, plugged all the gaps. Hebrew peeks at you through the keyhole. The language sees you naked. My father didn't let me see. He turned his back when he peed. I never really saw him. He always hid his sex the way Hebrew plural hides a woman, the way an audience is masculine in Hebrew, the way the word in Hebrew is masculine and feminine. There's nothing like those sweet things. Hebrew is a woman bathing. Hebrew is Bathsheba clean, a graven image not forbidden with tiny beauty marks and birthmarks. The older she gets, the more beautiful she is. Her judgment is sometimes prehistoric. This kind of neurosis is for her own good. Tell me in masculine, tell me in feminine. Every eye is childlike, an unfertilized egg. You can skip over sex. You can give up sex. Who can tell the sex of a baby chick? Man created by nature before a conjugated verb is planted in him. Memory is masculine, creates sexes. The offspring are the main thing because that's life. Hebrew is a sex maniac, and whatever you women say in a feminist complaint, searching for stimulation outside the language with an intonation that gives meaning to things, signs just of male or female in a sentence will change sexual relations, make them strange, mark every female, a different mark for men when every verb and verb group are marked. What does man do to a woman? What does he get in return? What power does she exert over him? And what sign given to objects into an abstract noun and particles? We'll get a natural sort of game, an emotional happening like a new forest, a game of universal natural forces determining all the particulars, universal signs for all events that may happen someday. Look at what a body language has and what proportions. Love her now without the cover of words. There's a noun and there's a gender for every noun. Just to give you one example of the silliness in Hebrew, sometimes, everything you have two of in your body is feminine. Eyes, hands, ears. There's one exception. The word for breast is masculine. Oh well. Hebrew is a complicated language. It's hard, but Hebrew is also wonderful and fascinating. It's the same alphabet. That same alphabet we saw in Hebrew is the same alphabet for Ladino and for Yiddish and for Judeo-Persian. Jews took that alphabet and brought it with them wherever they went and wrote their new languages in the old letters. You see it on synagogues. You see it on signs on the street in Israel today. You saw it on signs on the street in Birobidzhan, in eastern Siberia, where Stalin sent Jews to create a Yiddish paradise. Today, there are very few Jews left, but those Hebrew letters are still there. Today, Hebrew is an ancient language reborn. Modern Hebrew had to make all kinds of new words. We had the word in the Bible for chariot, a rechev. We didn't have any word for train, locomotive. So Eliezer ben Yehuda, the father of modern Hebrew, took the word rechev for chariot and made it rakevet for train. He had another problem, electricity. No word in the Bible for electricity. But there is a word in the book of Ezekiel that describes Ezekiel's chariot flying through the sky, surrounded by a brilliant light called chashmal. And we don't really know what chashmal meant in the original source, but it was brilliant and it was powerful. And so Ben Yehuda took the word chashmal, and that's the word for Hebrew in modern English. In modern Hebrew. That's the word for electricity in modern Hebrew. Another fascinating thing about Hebrew is that Hebrew is built on three-letter roots that say many things at the same basis. In English, for example, we have words that sound like they should be related, but they aren't. Book, story, library, scribe, school. They sound totally different, right? Book, story, library. We also have the word like bibliography. You think bibliography? Well, it's because English has words from many languages, sometimes from Latin languages, sometimes from Romance languages, sometimes from Germanic languages. So Buch, book, comes from German. Story comes from the French histoire. Library, also from French, livre, means a book. A scribe, think of the Spanish word escribir, to write. And a school is from a totally different root in German altogether. But in Hebrew, all of those words are based on the three letters S, F, R, S, Depending on the vowels, depending on the endings or the prefixes, they make all those other words that are all related with that three-letter root. So a book is a sefer. A story is a sipur. Remember, P and F with a dot are the same. A library is a sifriya, sefer in the sifriya. A scribe is a sofer. A sofer, a scribe, writes a sefer, a book, in a sifriya. They're all related. And even a school is related because a school in Hebrew is a Beit Sefer, a house of books. Until modern times, of course, with tablets and computers. Maybe they don't need books in schools anymore. But the word for a school, historically in Jewish life, was the Beit Sefer, the house of books. So just from that three letters, you get book and story and library and scribe. And you can play around with those in poetry and in songs. Or another example that we use all the time is shalom. Shalom means hello and goodbye and peace. But those three letters, sh, l, m, mean shlemut, perfection. Lishalem, to pay something. Lehashlim, to complete something. Right? You can see how they have sort of a rhyming meaning. Even my name, Adam. Adam means a person, humanity. The word dam means blood. Adama is earth, ground. So sometimes people translate an Adam, a person, as an earthling. And then Adom is red, the color. So you have an Adam, a person that has dam, blood, and the dam Adom, the red blood, falls on the Adama, on the earth. Again, all kinds of possibilities. But in English, it's earth, red, blood, human. No connection. So interesting poetic possibilities. Of course, Hebrew is deeply rooted in Jewish life. I can show you an example, going back to the Hebrew teaching tool. These are more examples, by the way, of letters that look like each other. Here's the H, the S, and the T. If you can tell them apart, again, you have to notice the subtle differences. Here you have a practice sheet from several hundred years ago of how to learn to read Hebrew. And if you zoom in, you can see, if you go to the upper right corner, the first letter is that aleph that's silent, and under it is an ah sound, so you have ah. The second letter is the B or the V with an ah sound under it, you've got ba. The next one down is another ah, the next one down is silent. The fourth one down is the S sound, so you've got e, be, ge, de, all the way across. They were learning Hebrew with the same letters and the same vowels in the same patterns with the same practice centuries ago in a workbook that we have that came down to us. And that connects us to them. If you go to Israel and you visit the shrine of the book called Hechal Ha, remember book, Sefer. This shrine of the book is where they put the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found and recovered. And if you can read modern Hebrew, you can read the Dead Sea Scrolls from 2,000 years ago. Fascinating. In fact, I remember when they published a finding based on the Dead Sea Scrolls in the New York Times, this must have been 25 years ago, my father started laughing when he read the article because they printed the panel with the Hebrew upside down. And he knew it because he could read the Hebrew. You might have remembered a Yiddish song called Oifen Pripachuk. It talks about a rabbi teaching children the Aleph Beit. And he says at the end of the first line, Kometz Aleph Aw. An Aleph with the teeth-shaped A vowel, you pronounce it as an Aw in Yiddish. That's that same chart that we saw on that ancient piece. And knowing Hebrew opens the doors to Jewish literature, to Jewish history, to reading the Bible and the Talmud, to being part of the global Jewish experience. So I want to show you that bet one more time. That bet that we saw is actually used for interpretation. See here the bet for the bait, the house. You can even see how a bait, if you turned it sideways, would look a bit like a bait, like a house. Rabbis trying to interpret the Hebrew Bible sometimes look at the shape of the letters and use that to interpret. They ask, why does creation begin with the letter bet instead of the letter aleph? After all, aleph is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And they come up with several reasons. But one of the reasons they give is they say that if you had a bet, remember we're reading from right to left, they would say you can only go forward from the bet to the left. You can't go up above it. If you're that dot, you can't go below it. You can't go back to before it. We're going to go from this point forward in talking about the beginnings of the universe. So even the shape of the letter is something they use to interpret. There's one more secret for me to show you. And that is, if we jump to the end, the letters on the dreidel. Everyone knows what they stand for, right? If you go from left to right in this version, Nes Gadol Haya Shvam, a great miracle happened there. But it turns out that's not where the letters originally came from. If you've been at Hadash for a while, you've heard this before. They were the rules for the game when it was played in Yiddish. Nun was nisht, nothing. Gimel, ganze, the whole thing. Hey was halb, half, and shin was stell ein, put one in. We know this because we found medieval German tops with an N, a G, an H, and an S in the Latin alphabet on them with that same meaning. The Jews took the German language and the German game, sometimes called teetotum. They wrote it in Hebrew letters because that was the alphabet they knew. And later on, they came up with the Hebrew acronym of a great miracle happened there. But the truth is, the origin was the German or Yiddish rules for the game. And yet, there is a miracle happening there. And the miracle is that we're still using those same letters to celebrate Jewish life and to connect the Hebrew language. Separate from Zionism, separate from Israel, these are Jewish letters. These are the letters of our people's language. If every language that they've spoken over the centuries, you can't do Yiddish and Ladino without these letters. And so I encourage you, if you don't know them, to explore them. And if you do know them, to use them. After all, they're ours. And they open up the doors to experiencing Jewish culture in new ways.